Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 160 of Through the Years, the podcast that reviews Ring of Honor show by show from the beginning. My name is Trevor. I'm joined as always by the co-host, Matt Feuerstein. Matt, it's the first time, it's that special time of every year of Through the Years where it's the first time where I ran my air conditioner as a preemptive measure for half an hour before the podcast, where I'm like, I gotta build up some cold to sustain me for the next 2+ hours.
That usually doesn't start for me for a couple months from now. Usually June is when I have to worry about that. Although if we had recorded a week ago, I might have been in that boat because there was a bizarre heat wave in middle of April here in New York where it got to like almost 90 degrees a couple days, but now it's back to
Wow.
And that's Fahrenheit, so we're not all dead as would be the case if it were 90 degrees Celsius.
Thanks, Mom Donnie. Ever since you hugged Mr. Met, just another thing going down the drain. Right, Matt? Right? Let's talk about that for 2 hours.
All I know is that this winter was terrible, and I welcomed the hot weather for a few days, but now it's back to being chilly, so I don't have to worry about it.
Matt, you are always chill. Even I know that's not true, but
if I'm always chilly, then you're always T-Boz. Trevor Boz.
I am T-Boss. Okay. Matt, since there was 3 weeks between the last Ring of Honor show and this one, which means we actually, for once, it feels like we haven't had much of this lately. A little bit of Ring of Honor news that happened in the timeline between the previous show, which was Manhattan Mayhem 2 and tonight's show. So got a little bit of a news section here. It's not crazy. It's mostly Bryan Danielson related, which is the best kind of news, obviously. But first, comes from the Pro Wrestling Torch. They wrote at the time, ROH World Champion Takeshi Morishima successfully defended his title on September 1st against Katsuhiko Nakajima at the Kensuke Office Show in Tokyo, Japan. And yeah, I actually checked this out because this match is someone uploaded for free on YouTube. And I watched it today, and it's not as good as most of Morishima's matches. It's not terrible, but it's not as good as most of his matches, title defenses we've seen lately on Through the Years. It's almost 21 minutes long. It's much slower. It's got a little bit less of the Morishima personality in it, I would say. But it's not a terrible match, and it is online for anyone that is curious about it, but it is an interesting thing that I completely forgot about.
Well, that was a ringing endorsement, but it is online if you want to watch it.
That might be a bigger ringing endorsement than I give much of the show we're going to cover tonight. So,
man.
Next, so now the rest is all Bryan Danielson stuff in the news section. But the first thing would be, this isn't a news thing as much as not a correction, but an oversight I made. Last show.
Pun intended, oversight.
Last show was Manhattan Mayhem 2, as I already mentioned, which had the famous Bryan Danielson versus Morishima first time they wrestled, where Danielson suffered the serious eye injury and worked through it. And we talked all about that, including a description that Gabe Sapolsky wrote on the ROH message board at the time, where he really dramatically went through how Bryan's eye rolled. He had a backstage exam from the on-site doctor after the match, and his eye rolled back in his head, and no matter how much they asked and he tried, he couldn't get the eye to come back down. And I talked about that. I had completely forgotten until I was doing research for this episode that entire medical exam, or at least part of it, is on the ROH video wire. You can actually watch that. It is kind of disturbing because you can hear him give a very real, I don't know if I've ever heard Bryan Danielson yelp in pain for real before. I consider him such a tough guy in his own way. He when they touch his broken orbital bone, you can hear that. And yeah, it is very true. You can see the doctor being okay, look down now, after he tells him to look up. And Bryan is I am trying. This is as far as I can go, and it won't come back down, which, Matt, if that happened to me, I think I said on the last episode, I would go into hysterics. But so yeah,
you'd retire not just from wrestling, but from trying to open your eye.
I would retire from life, which some would argue I already have, but even more dramatically. But for those who, if you have, if you have the weird urge to see that, that is the August 31st, 2007 ROH Video Wire, which again is another thing for free on YouTube. And yeah, I completely memory hold that was actually documented on video. But that brings us to what I'm going to give a little mini timeline because, of course, one of the stories of this of this show tonight is Bryan Danielson comes back. And when we last left you on the last show, Gabe Sapolsky again in that post on ROH message board said that Bryan would be gone 4 to 6 weeks and that Bryan knew his own limits and wouldn't rush back. Well, he is back this night in a limited role after 3 weeks. Well, there was a bit of, it felt like it was almost like a last minute decision because we'll go first to the Pro Wrestling Torch. This all happened between the last show and this show, which again, 3 week span. The Torch wrote, Bryan Danielson has been removed from his match on September 14th in Detroit, Michigan, which has been changed to ROH World Tag Team Champions, the Briscoes versus Austin Aries and Matt Cross. There's been no word yet as to whether or not he will wrestle or appear on the September 15th pay-per-view taping in Chicago Ridge, Illinois. And if you're wondering what the match was that was changed, the original main event of the show we're covering tonight, it was supposed to be Bryan Danielson and Austin Aries versus the Briscoes for the tag titles. Because Bryan gets hurt, he ends up doing something else, which we'll get to. Matt Cross takes that spot. Matt Cross was originally supposed to wrestle Roderick Strong on this show. Roderick Strong gets put in a four-way, so that would have that I do think that did hurt the show because I think that would have been a better match than what we got in the main event tonight. I mean, I am a big believer in the power of Bryan Danielson, but this shows you that like initially the thought was ROH was just like, yeah, he's not going to be able to work tonight, and maybe we can force it for the pay-per-view. The Pro Wrestling Torch 1 week later wrote this. Bryan Danielson's eye was recently examined, and his recovery is said to be going well. His vision is still blurry, but he no longer has to wear an eye patch all the time, as he not only has to wear it during the day. Danielson will be visiting a doctor again this week, and is hopeful of getting clearance to wrestle this weekend. So again, Bryan Danielson is just a different kind of person where his vision is still blurry. They still want him to wear an eye patch during the day. And he's like, if I come back later this week, can I maybe wrestle? Like,
I wonder if you could just always like find a doctor where you're like, it's just, we're just pretending. So it's not actually dangerous or something like that. And like somebody to clear you on the basis of like that.
Yeah, find the reverse of a Mark doctor, the old doctor that's so impressed with being close to wrestlers that they prescribe them anything. Like the doctor that like hates wrestling and refuses to believe like that there's any physical sacrifice to it all. Like
everyone in their 40s dad who is just
exactly.
like, come on, this is all phony baloney. That's what the doctor would say.
Like this, the doctor being like, yes, Bryan, I am sure you can't see out of that eye. Wink. It's going to be very hard for you to wrestle, but I think somehow you'll make it through. And
Bryan, he thinks Bryan is winking back because he has an eye patch on.
Exactly. And we'll go finally to end the little Bryan saga of the eye. The Wrestling Observer wrote this. Bryan Danielson is now planning on returning September 15th at the pay-per-view taping in Chicago for a title match with Takeshi Morishima. Danielson gave word on 9/11, never forget, is that he believes he'll be ready to come back early for Chicago, although he needed one last doctor's visit this week to be fully cleared. So again, they were going down to the wire here where they were basically announcing he's coming back before his doctor had said he could. But again, remember, as Gabe said in the post, we talked about in the last episode, they are not going to rush him coming back, even though basically this all hinges on a last-minute approval from a doctor. But the other big thing that happened between the last Ring of Honor show and this one would be that the NWA title had a new champion, and we talked about this a few episodes ago where for the first 5 years of TNA, they used the storied, decades-long, once hugely important NWA title belts as their title belts. They had a partnership with the NWA, the National Wrestling Alliance. And then in 2007, there was a split in that relationship, and the NWA took their titles back, and they decided, hey, we are going to we're going to crown a new champion. There were a lot of rumors about Bryan Danielson being it. And so On September 1st in IWA Puerto Rico, Adam Pearce defeated Brent Albright to win the vacant AWA World Heavyweight title. This was supposed to be Danielson versus Albright. Brian had beat Adam Pearce, in fact, in a semifinal match in Vancouver, but then he got the eye injury against Morishima. And so, yeah, I think Bryan Danielson was supposed to be the NWA champion, and that's one thing this cost us. Although we wouldn't have heard about ROH because I alluded to this before, but finally the last little news bit, PW Insider wrote this after the NWA title change. Mike Johnson writes, in regard to ROH regular Adam Pearce winning the NWA championship in Puerto Rico over the weekend, defeating Brent Albright, don't expect to see the belt recognized or featured in Ring of Honor at this time for a number of reasons. In speaking to ROH's Gabe Sapolsky, he noted that the belt won't be featured because the company is looking to establish their own belt as the top title in the promotion to their pay-per-view audience, and utilizing the NWA title would dilute that. He also noted that he doesn't control the booking of the NWA title, so it'd be counterproductive to push a belt that has nothing to do with ROH, that was last seen on TNA programming no less, and would then force them into a situation where he'd have to book to protect and or sacrifice his own contracted talents, because once you acknowledge the title, you have to book around it or book around it accordingly, or risk disrespecting it. With the Full Impact Pro title being used as something of a secondary belt to the ROH title held by Takeshi Morishima, Sapolsky would rather use ROH's pay-per-view and DVD to continue to build the importance and prestige of these titles.
I wonder if we ever find out the story as we go along of what happens, because at a certain point Gabe changes his mind, and we do get NWA title matches on ROH shows while he's still Booker.
This is just a complete random speculated theory off my dome, but I know around this time there was a lot of talk of NWA almost trying to kind of get in on the ROH hardcore fan thing, where like maybe we'll start selling more DVDs, and the idea that the final four of this tournament was Brent Albright versus Claudio and Danielson versus Adam Pearce. So they were going pretty heavy on the ROH guy, tip at this point. So I wonder if Gabe, it was almost the thing where maybe Gabe felt like these guys are kind of encroaching on us, so I don't want to promote them when they might be like kind of fighting for our fans too. And it might be a thing where, remember where there was times where TNA, was it felt like TNA sometimes softened certain things when they realized ROH wouldn't be a certain level of threat to them. And I wonder if maybe that's something here where it was like, once you realize that this NWA revival isn't really going to be a huge competitor for your fan base, we can talk about the NWA title. I do like the idea, that the logic used here, that if you acknowledge that someone in the company has the NWA title, you have to book and respect them. You have to protect them. But if they're the champion and you just don't say that they're the champion, then that's okay. Like, I can kind of see how that makes sense, but it's also kind of bizarre. If we said Adam Pearce is the NWA champion, we'd have to make sure he never loses. But as long as we just don't say it, well, now it's not disrespectful at all.
It's hard to know how much of Gabe's public explanation was the real explanation, because he was talking about how I don't book the NWA title. Well, it's not like wrestling promotions through the years haven't featured many champions of other promotions whose championships they don't book. You know what I mean? Like, even including ROH. That's
in the early days they featured the NWA the X Division title, right? At least once or twice you had AJ defended in ROH.
Yeah, and they're partners with Noah, and they feature Noah champions, which they don't book. They've definitely featured other champions before. Yeah. So it makes it seem not exactly credible, but I guess there's logic to it.
It still bums me that Danielson never got a reign with the NWA title, because even though by this point the NWA title did not mean what it used to, is still such a huge part of wrestling history. As a geek for that kind of stuff, I would, and as a huge Bryan Danielson fan, it would have been cool to see him like share that lineage with so many people, when for decades that was the title in professional wrestling.
Yeah, good point. I know you're most mad that he never got to be the champion of TNA though.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, could you imagine the matches with Jeff Jarrett and see, people nowadays, if I say that, will be like, what are you calling down Jeff Jarrett for? He's cool. And I you know what? He is cool. But this isn't, I'm not talking modern Jeff Jarrett. I'm not talking USWA Memphis Jarrett. I'm talking 2005, 2006 Jeff Jarrett plunder match main event Jeff Jarrett. It's a different guy. It's
crazy. It's crazy that we have to explain to the youngsters that that he was not exactly super well liked in the hardcore scene during this era.
In a way, I guess it should give us, well, it should give me, you're always been well liked, but like,
this just, please.
In the sense that I like, because the other thing we've talked about sometimes, right, is how no one these days knows that like Triple H used to be really hated in the larger wrestling audience. Like I saw during all the talk of WrestleMania this week, some people are like, oh, like people on Twitter that are clearly probably in their early to mid 20s, like, oh, you're trying to retroactively act like people didn't love Triple H. It's like, in 2006, 2007, the easiest way to get a pop on the indies was to do the pedigree. Because yeah. So, but it's amazing how, basically, Matt, you can kill your name off to one generation and you just have to wait it out and you'll get a second chance. Sometimes. So, and that brings us to the show tonight, which is Motor City Madness 2007. It took place September 14th, 2007 at the Michigan State Fairgrounds and Expo Center in Detroit, Michigan, in front of a reported crowd of 550 fans. Motor City Madness 2007, aka we've run out of names to call shows because I don't think the Motor City Madness 2006 was like, oh, that's a legendary show. We've got to continue the lineage of Motor City Madness. And this was the first show they ran in Detroit since WrestleMania weekend, which they ran because, Detroit had WrestleMania that week. But two dark matches that did not make the DVD. We got Ernie Osiris defeating Dingo, and we had Shane Hagedorn defeating Kyle Durden. And then we opened the DVD up proper, and we open with interviewer Rebecca Bayless in the crowd as a pre-show match happens behind her. She says tonight she's going to try to interview some wrestlers after their matches, which, yes, is her job. That's the whole fucking segment. I don't know why they keep doing this.
Yeah, it's really insane, like, the way they open these shows. Like, it's, first of all, we've talked about how they try something new with the interviews on like every other show. Yeah, certainly on all the B shows over the past few months. We have the sideways interviews, we have the weird color filter fishhole interviews, we have the immediate cut to the back interviews, and now we have Rebecca Bayless saying she's going to interview people after their matches. And so I thought, oh, so it'll do a thing where like she'll catch people right after their matches. But no, I feel like there are fewer post-match interviews on this show than there are on a typical ROH DVD. Like, I think she does it twice on the whole DVD. So not only was this a like completely mundane, like uninteresting comment by her, but it didn't even turn out to be true.
Yeah, and
I just don't know like what they're thinking a lot of the time. I don't know what they were going for here. This didn't have to be on the DVD at all.
It's really interesting too. Like one thing about ROH is they've had, with Gabe Sapolsky, obviously Rob Feinstein and Doug Gentry had creative input until they left too. So there was a change in some ways, but overall they've had the same creative driving force in Gabe Sapolsky the entire run. And generally, when you watch TV shows or stuff, a lot of times the first season isn't as smooth. You see people figure things out and work things out. You certainly saw that in a lot of ways with Ring of Honor. Sure, if you listen to me on the first few episodes of this podcast, I'm not as comfortable as I am now, which is a low bar. But the thing I will say is, to what you're talking about, Matt, is it's crazy that in 2007 they still like to what you just said. This is a company 5 years in, run by the same guy, and they still don't have they don't have a clear idea of like how they want to structure backstage promos and things,
or how to begin a release. I suppose this is better than a music video where they give away the finishes of all the matches, but it still seems like a total waste of time and like certainly not a hook for the rest of the show.
It's almost like Gabe's having a midlife crisis with production because, again, in 2007, in the first 9 months, he threw out so many of these different little production ideas that last like 2 shows, 3 shows, whatever, after a period where, he wasn't tinkering like that nearly as often. And it's just like all of a sudden he woke up one day, it's like, this just isn't fresh. I got to freshen up this relationship. He's got to try new things. And so far they have not been working for Gabe to his liking, it appears. But, That brings us to the opening match on the DVD. That would be Davey Richards defeats Silas Young via submission in 8 minutes, 26 seconds when he made him tap out to the Chimera. This is Silas Young's first match ever in ROH. And yeah, that's kind of a notable thing given how, he'd be a big part of Ring of Honor for many years in the future. Matt, what'd you think about this?
Well, first of all, it's interesting to position yourself in the time of the show because Silas Young comes out to Don't Stop Believin', right? And this is only a couple months after the airing of the finale of The Sopranos. So Don't Stop Believing was really in the zeitgeist at this point. I guess The Sopranos kind of brought it back into the zeitgeist. So it's just kind of funny to think of now we think of it as a karaoke classic, but it was so timely at this point. And I assume because he came out to that song that Silas Young was from Detroit, but I looked it up and he is actually Prazak says he came up in the Wisconsin scene. So
yeah,
but I thought maybe he was born and raised in South Detroit. And he took the midnight train going to, what was the name of this venue again?
He took the midnight train going to the, let me just take a quick look, the Michigan State Fairgrounds and Expo Center.
He took the midnight train going to the Michigan State Fairgrounds and Expo Center. All right, that is what the song says. But it's funny because, Silas Young spent years in ROH in a different era, and he certainly had a vibe to him, and this was a totally different vibe. It's interesting to watch a wrestler earlier in their career kind of finding themselves. You know what I mean? Before they discover what their actual persona is going to be. And so it's just totally different. You get that sometimes, and that was definitely the case with Silas Young. Long hair, slapping hands, just kind of just like a white meat babyface, And
he literally says when he makes his entrance, he goes, "Come on, babyface fire!" He screams as he makes his entrance. There's no subtext, there's just text.
Yeah, so just a parody of a white meat babyface. And he gets a decent amount of babyface shine, so to speak, before Richard stomps him low and then starts laying kicks into him. And at that point, it's pretty much a simple babyface heel match. Richards hits a bunch of hard kicks, and Young gets a few comebacks, and the finish is where Young avoids a DR driver and does a roll up, and Richards pops up with an enziguri, a released German, and then rolls him into the Kimura, and Young actually escapes and Richards rains down, cross faces on him, and locks the Kimura on before a tap out. The finish didn't seem entirely smooth. But I did think Richards' offense looked good, and it was interesting to see a wrestler's early days. So I wasn't bored when I watched this match, but it wasn't anything memorable at all. And this is definitely one of those B show openers where, they would never open a show in a major, what they considered a major show with a newcomer like this. Just getting, having a match with no real sense of purpose or anything. So not a bad debut for Young or anything, but we didn't see much of him for a while after this. So I guess it didn't light Gabe's world on fire either.
Yeah. Like you, it was really interesting just to see a younger Silas Young. If you only know him from his latter day last real man gimmick, I would say he's borderline unrecognizable here. I was thinking when I was watching this, there's that phrase, the camera adds 10 pounds. I would say there should be another phrase, in Silas Young's case, the mustache adds 15 years because he looks so much younger without a mustache.
Yeah.
Which is crazy, and that's one of those things that you really want when you're a teenager. And then when you're older, you're like, oh, I got to shave off this mustache. I look too old. But when you're 15 and want to buy booze, if you grow a mustache, you're very happy you look 15 years older. But
yeah, you know what's weird? I have a bit of a beard, and I have had one for, I don't know, more than 15 years now. And I really never shaved it off, and I tried a year and a half ago. And when I shaved off my beard, I thought I looked a lot older. And I was like, okay, let me grow the beard back. It's kind of weird. I don't know how common that is, but I felt like having the beard actually makes me look a little younger.
Yeah, I only do clean face or full beard. But every time I shave, I do the thing that so many guys do, which is I experiment with what could have been a lot of Marvel what if scenarios.
Oh yeah. I definitely took a couple pictures with just the mustache before I shaved the rest of it off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and exactly. Like I always do, the Triple H Motorhead era beard to see what that would look like. But sometimes try mutton chops. That's never a good idea. But I always end with the mustache, and every time I have the same thought, which is this looks good. I should keep the mustache. And then I never have the guts to. I'm like, I know I can't. A mustache carries a special weight.
Yeah,
I think
you're making too much. Like I've had people, I showed the picture to some people and they thought it looked good too, and I was like, but you're making a statement when you have a mustache. Yeah. You're either being ironic in some way, or you're saying something else about yourself. Yeah, and you're right. It carries a weight that it just makes me uncomfortable, no matter what.
Like, my dad for years had a mustache, and he was a big burly lumber grader who everyone called Butch. I am the opposite of all of that. He was worthy of the mustache. I don't think I can. I can't take it, man. I can't take it. But even though I don't think I look bad with one. But anyway, I do not believe this match was taped for ROHvideos.com, but this felt like one of those semi-squashes that they would tape for the site, because Silas gets a bit of offense, but not a ton. Davey controls, and he puts in not a bad effort. He's healing it up and engaging the crowd. But I would say it felt like he was working at 75% here, which is going to become maybe a bit of a pattern on this show. They burned very little here. They don't do much in the way of near falls or giant moves. Silas gets that one standout spot I would say of the match for him would be the headstand into an Arabian press, which the crowd likes so much. Some fans give him a standing ovation, but otherwise he just comes off as a solid wrestler that isn't getting to show off much except some of his basic fundamentals. Like, oh yeah, he can bump, he can sell. I did like, and you kind of talked a little bit about this earlier, where you were about you being surprised that Silas is from Wisconsin. There's a moment in this match where Davey, trying to heel, he screams at one point to the Michigan fans, "Is this your hometown, boy?" And you can hear the fans scream back, "No!" like I love that. I'm sure that was probably a mistake on Davey's part.
Davey heard the song. Davey heard the song too. That's what happened.
Yeah, and yeah, I looked up and like you discovered Silas worked almost entirely in Wisconsin and Illinois, and was not aware of the thriving Wisconsin mid-aughts indie scene because he worked regularly in Wisconsin. So yeah, he was not taking the midnight train to the Michigan State Expo Center. But also, speaking of Davey, I guess we should update people. He has dropped the Benoit-esque leather vest he had been wearing on the recent shows, but he still threw, as you mentioned, cross faces during the match. So he's been kind of partially scared straight by the negative reaction his Benoit baiting got on the last show, but still flirting with it a little bit. He gets away with it here. There was no moment in this match, unlike recent matches, which makes the crowd go, ooh. so he's progressed. Anyway, I felt like this match was a high average. There's nothing wrong with it. Instantly forgettable. These are the matches we should call the podcaster's chore because they're so hard to have opinions on. There isn't much extraordinarily right or wrong with them.
At least it was a debut with somebody that seemed totally different than before, so we can at least talk about that,
Yeah, exactly. We then cut to the Briscoes outside, staying in front of a chain link fence. They're facing the Brazilians tonight. Mark bemoans, quote, "all these factions," unquote, that have been showing up. And he wonders, what's up with these clowns on the internet? Project 161. Jay says they do their fighting in the ring, not on the internet. Mark says that his doggone internet is too slow. And then Jay says, we're still on dial-up, so we don't worry about none of that.
Briscoes, they also talk about how Project 161s are punks on the internet writing, quote, some dumbass poetry, which I really liked.
And so Jay finishes by saying that the Briscoes are the best. But yeah, that was a little bit of the the Briscoes by this point were very charismatic in backstage promos, but I think they would get even more confident in them. But that's a little bit of like the Briscoes color, where they're just riffing on not having the internet stuff that we would see, I think, more of as they grew into themselves even more. And yeah, that was very funny. And
yeah, Jay I think is already a good promo at this point.
Yeah. And it's funny because I don't know how, like, I transitioned from dial-up to cable in the like 97, 98, I think.
Oh, nice. I didn't until 2001.
Yeah, I feel like maybe I lived in an area that just happened to get it quick. It was like a weird mom and pop company where I'm like, occasionally you hear about this where like some people have like this weird mom and pop internet company where like this is really good and not that expensive. I don't know how you're doing it, and they almost always go out of business quickly. And somehow
Oh,
we
yeah.
were lucky enough to get that where I was growing up, and that's thanks to that's how I met you and so many other people because
Aw.
that's what I instantly got to like the Scott Keith Netcop Newsboard and things like that. But
In the 90s, I feel like if you were kind of nerdy and into computers, the cool thing to do was to use a local ISP instead of like AOL or whatever.
yeah,
And so yeah, so we always used local ISP too. And then when I went away to college in 2001, they had broadband. And so when I went back home over the holidays, I was like, Mom, Dad, I can't with this dial-up. Please, I beg you. And they weren't using the internet at all at that point, so they kind of conceded and ended up getting a cable modem thing or whatever they had back then. And so we finally had broadband at home.
well, I know we have some listeners younger than us in their early 20s, and for those who just don't know, dial-up internet, it was a big deal to switch, not just for the speed, switching away from dial-up to cable, but because dial-up tied up your phone line. So as a little kid, when you had dial-up, you had to constantly be like, is it okay? Can I use the internet for half an hour? Can I use
Yes.
the internet for an hour? Like, is anyone expecting an important phone call anytime soon? And so that was more important than the transition to like, faster speed was just, I can use this anytime I want and not feel guilty. It's not a negotiation now.
We also have to explain to them what a phone line is. No, yeah, but
Used to
it's
be,
sorry.
no, you on.
In the early days of the internet, yeah, I had to do that. I had to ask my parents like permission, like, can I use the phone and stuff. And then eventually my sister got a phone line in her bedroom, like a separate phone line. And then my sister went away to college. She's 4 years older than me. So my parents were able to get someone to come and switch the internet to her phone line. And so then I didn't have to worry about it anymore, but it was still dial up.
Yeah. But at least you got, I would say you got the best of one world and the worst of the other world.
Yes,
You got the half. But brings us to the second match on the show, the YRR of Chase and Rance and Kenny King, who was scored to the ring by Valerie Malone, defeated Alex Payne and Mitch Franklin in 3 minutes, 1 second when King pinned Payne after the YRR hit him with a combination Blue Thunder Bomb and Neckbreaker. And speaking of debuts, this is the ROH debuts for Chase and Rance and Kenny King, who were regulars in FIP as part of the YRR stable, which is short for Young, Rich, and Ready for Action, which then should it be YRRA at the very least? But
Yes.
anyway, unfortunately, I think I need to talk about Chase and Rance for a minute. On through the years, we've occasionally had to talk about some people who have done some truly reprehensible things. And over the course of doing this podcast, my show philosophy has generally evolved into when they first debut, inform the listeners of those things if they're particularly awful and established. And I don't want to be some elephant in the room where our listeners wonder if we know what they did. We do. Chase and Rance is a convicted sex criminal. Some years after this match, he had sex with a 15-year-old when he was well into his adulthood, I believe 25. And in fact, he was arrested again last year for reportedly not keeping his information updated and truthful, which is very important and legally obligated because he is on the sex offenders registry list. So I think it's safe to say that, like other wrestlers we've had to talk about, Chase and Rance has done some horrific things. Again, my general philosophy when doing this podcast is I'm going to cover people's work on the shows, and if I find it bad, the work bad, I'll say it's bad. If I find it good, I'll say it's good, because that is very separate from their actions as a human being, which I think speak for themselves, especially in a situation like this where the allegations are so terrible and he was convicted. We're kind of lucky doing a retro ROH podcast where we get to largely sidestep the ethical minefield of wondering if praising the work of someone who has done evil things will result in material gains for them. Like we just talk about 20-year-old matches that are now owned by someone that wasn't even involved with the promotion at the time.
Yeah.
So
There's not we're not going to have to mention him very much, right? Like he doesn't come up.
We sadly
very
will
often.
see him again, but not much. Yeah.
Yeah.
And finally, before I move on to the match, I also always want to emphasize that if a wrestler doing horrendous acts makes you incapable of watching them, or listening to people talk about their work is just something you want to skip, I totally get it. That's very understandable. And if you can separate the work from the person, that's also understandable. I always say this. I have people in wrestling, books, music, etc., where I can separate the art from the artist. And there are other people, other artists in those same genres where I can't separate their crimes. They trigger personal things in me, or their crimes are so wrapped in what their work was that I can't enjoy it anymore. And I think that's pretty common to like have different cases hit you in different ways. So with all that being said, just want to get that done. And you know what? Just use this take this conversation, keep it in your mind so I don't have to repeat it for the next show when Necro Butcher makes his return. So, yeah. So yeah, I think that's also been well established about fair. Anyway, wrestlers are horrible. People are horrible. This actually is just I would say is just a short showcase for the YRR, with the exciting stuff coming in the final minute of the 3-minute match. King, I felt like he stood out with some of his athleticism and he flashed some charisma, which is always impressive to me when it's your first match in like a new, larger promotion, that you have kind of the guts to, you don't just freeze up a bit and just aren't like, I just got to focus on doing the moves. He has a nice spine buster. There's the big spot of the match is Rant jumping off of King's back to drop kick Mitch Franklin off the top turnbuckle to the floor. And Franklin takes a big bump on that. That's like the one really notable spot in this match. The first 2 minutes of this match weren't anything notable, but the final minute is, I think, what you would want from a debut like this, where if it's this short, where it's just hit a few flashy moves, come off as confident, win quickly and convincingly. So we can get to the post-match in a sec, but I mean, how many thoughts do you have about a 3-minute match, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, when I didn't remember this segment so much, but it was, it made it feel like this was a match that was setting up a big push for the YRR, because they were made to look really good. It was basically a squash. And some of the moves got a really big reaction. For instance, when King hit a pretty cool, like a leaping enziguri on Franklin on the top rope, and then Rance leaped off King's back to kick Franklin off the top all the way to the floor. There were some moves that got over here, but it was kind of seemingly all for naught given what happened next. But it was like, are these guys going to come in and get a push? I don't remember that, but nope, that is not what happens.
And the YRR were like FIP regulars for a period of years. They were every show kind of guys. So,
and Sal Renaro was part of it too, right?
Yeah, I think so. They were a stable, not just the two guys you see here. So yeah, I think if you go on Cage Archer Sign, there's probably like one of those stables where technically there's been like 12 people at one time or another probably have been at it, but who knows how many of them were in it at one time. But after the match, Rance gets on the mic and he says, "We're looking at the embodiment of what we all want to be. They are the YRR, young, rich, and ready for action." Chase and Rance says he lives the life we envy. And Matt, for once in my life, I have found someone who says that, and it isn't true. Like, that was notable for me. It's like, for once, no. I have found a person whose life I do not envy. Rance says they drive BMWs, they fly first class, they drink Cristal, they get all the girls. And thankfully, at this point, final countdown starts playing, and Bryan Danielson comes
by
along.
Talking about how you make subtext text, right? Babyface fire. We are rich. Here are things that we do like rich people do. You want to be us because of all of the rich people things that we do. We are rich and young.
I also think like stuff like we fly first class. It's really doesn't work because one, every fan knows that's not true, but also I think even fans believe that somehow they could afford to fly themselves first class. They would know Ring of Honor wasn't going to fly them first class. So to me, if you're flying yourself out first class to an indie wrestling show, I guess that's like, I don't know if that's impressive. Like, I think that's kind of like, I don't know, maybe you need better priorities unless you're that rich. But,
well, maybe.
anyway.
Well, that's the idea. They're that rich.
Yeah.
And
So we
and extreme. I don't know. Yeah, never
and they're
mind.
ready for action.
Yeah.
But we see Bryan Danielson coming out wearing the eye patch. This is his first appearance since Takeshi Morishima broke his orbital bone and damaged his retina. In fact, I think this might be the first time he worked not just ROH, but maybe any wrestling show in the 3 weeks since he got hurt. And Bryan gets in the ring, grabs the mic. We get a huge, "you're going to get your fucking head kicked in" chant. Bryan says the YRR just had a very impressive debut in ROH. And then Bryan mocks them, saying, "Oh, the BMWs and Cristal are very important for professional wrestling." I liked the little snide sarcasm that you don't usually get from Bryan Danielson. I enjoyed that. He said, they say they're ready for action. Well, tomorrow night I have a world title match, so I have to check to see if my depth perception with my wearing this eye patch is good enough to wrestle. So I challenge one of you to a match right now. Kenny King accepts, and we get Bryan Danielson defeating Kenny King via submission in 4 minutes 12 seconds when he made him tap out to a triangle choke. This match is almost entirely on the mat, almost entirely Danielson. There's about a minute left. Rance hits a cheap shot to Bryan's eye, followed by a regrettable kick from King that whiffs, but Bryan quickly comes back with a couple elbow strikes, and he gets the immediate submission on the triangle choke. So I felt like this was pretty grounded, even for like a short Bryan Danielson match. So he probably really was like testing things out.
Yeah, I mean, it was just like, it was definitely just like a tune-up kind of situation and trying to see if he was okay. I mean, I think I'll get to my overall thoughts on this right after you finish the segment, but
Okay. Yeah. So next we get Bryan gets back on the mic and he challenges Rance, who attacked him during the match with King. King asks Bryan for a handshake, and so when Bryan turns around to look at King, Rance attacks from behind. The match is on, and then Bryan Danielson defeats Chase and Rance via ref stoppage in 43 seconds when he stomped him a million times. Rance actually lands a bunch of forms to Bryan's head, which I was kind of surprised that, like, this guy has a broken orbital bone, and I'm sure there's a safe way to throw them, but you would think a lot of times when a guy has an injury like that, they just play ultra safe and are like, just don't touch my head. And clearly Bryan's not that kind of guy, I don't think. Bryan hits a running kick, he hits the stomps, and the match, again, not much to say. The match ends in 45 seconds, and that is the whole segment. So what do you think about this as an entire thing, Matt?
I mean, it's always fun watching Bryan Danielson beat the crap out of people, and he's good at it, and he seemed to be having fun doing it. I did find it weird that they bring in this new act and give them a squash win only to have them squash right after. I didn't really it just, I don't know, it felt like a weird choice, like where Danielson could have just done this to, I don't know, the students. And I get that you're saying that you'd rather him do it to somebody that seems like they have some credibility and the students didn't yet have that. But did these guys really have credibility when they were brand new to the ROH roster? It just didn't make sense to have the YRR squash somebody and then be squashed immediately after. In the end, it didn't really matter because it's not like they did much with the YRR after this. I don't think they're back very much at all, and when they are, it's sporadic. But still, seems like a weird choice.
Yeah, and that brings us to the ROH World Title #1 contendership 4-corner survival match. Erick Stevens defeated Delirious, Kevin Steen, and Roderick Strong in 13 minutes flat when he pinned Delirious after hitting a power bomb. I'm going to take this one first, too, just because I don't even count that last thing as a match. Gabe was a master of, I've said this before, of booking one wrestler having 2 ongoing feuds at the same time. And a fringe benefit of that for him was matches like this, where 4 ways where he could have the feuds collide in a single match, where here you've got Roderick is facing Delirious and Erick Stevens in the same match, and he's having 2 separate feuds with them at the same time. And I would say an unfortunate part of this match is it really doesn't take advantage of that at all. Like, I would call this match generic hard work. For whatever reason, tags are ignored in this match, unlike almost every other 4-way where they do abide by tag rules. This is basically like a 4-way tornado match. No one even attempts to stand in a corner and wait for a tag, which halfway through the match, the announcers try to explain away as the ref relaxing the rules since this match is so important. But what this means in practice is most of this match is 2 guys wrestling in the ring and 2 other guys wrestling on the floor in brawls we hear but rarely see. And then whoever is doing the outside brawling, whoever's doing the wrestling in the ring, frequently swapping. There aren't many double teams. There aren't many triple teams. There aren't a ton of sequences involving all 4, although there are some. It's more of a switch off, do some stuff, switch off kind of match. This match is it's a sprint where something is always going on, but there are sprints that are thrill every 15-second roller coasters, and then there are sprints like this where it feels like no true wrestlers get to spend enough time together to build momentum. If you watch this match without commentary, with no real prior knowledge of these four, I don't think you would know that three of these four guys were currently involved in feuds against each other, except for maybe the very first spot in the match where Delirious jumped strong. You wouldn't know who was a face or a heel here, except maybe if you watch Kevin Steen's entrance, you can see, oh, that guy seems pretty cocky. And then I just felt like there were so many things you could have taken advantage of in this match, like Steen's personality and his heel character and those existing feuds. You could have had Delirious and Stevens really team up against a common foe in Roddy, or fight over who gets to kick his ass. You could have had Steen and Roddy form a heel alliance for one match. But you get none of that. You get no hate here. This match it's just worked in a way that leaves no room for anything but guys doing spots. But then as a spot fest, it's not structured to leave you breathless as a spot fest either. So overall, it's hard work. It's okay. It's not boring, but I'd rank it as above average, not even good. It's a match that feels kind of dumb in that, like, it just doesn't have. And it's very straightforward. There's no real ideas in this match. And I have some thoughts about the booking of this match too, but first I'll just, Matt, what do you think about the match?
The early part of the match, actually the first like 2/3, were very confusing to me. I was like, is this like Dragon Gate rules? Is this a four-corner survival? Did I miss something where they said it was a four-way fray? Like, I've never seen them work a four-corner survival match like this. Did they make any kind of statement about this match having different rules?
In the middle of the match, the announcer said, it looks like the refs are relaxing the rules because there's so much at stake in this match.
Yeah, that's weird. That, like, they just, like, it was very distracting to me. I'm like, why aren't they tagging? It's like, and it seemed like they were hanging out on the outside before, and like waiting for someone to come out before they came in. It was just very bizarre. But I will say there was a spot where everybody was knocked down. There was like a Delirious hitting a panic attack on Steen, but then Stevens boots or Steen boots and cannonballs Delirious, and then Steven runs Steen into the corner and goes for the choo-choo, but Strong comes in with the sick kick, and then Steen enziguri Strong, and then Delirious hits Steen with a missile drop kick, and then Stevens pops in with a German suplex, dropping Delirious on his head, and all four guys are down. And that was a good sequence, and it got a big reaction, and I think after that, the crowd was into all the big moves and stuff. And there were some fun parts in that last sequence, like when Stevens picked up Steen for the TKO, and while he's on Stevens' shoulder, Steen yells, "Oh no, let's talk about this!" before Stevens, who doesn't talk about it. Yeah, I think the finish was just kind of out of nowhere, where Stevens and Delirious just were fighting, and Stevens just eventually hits the Dr. Bomb and gets the win. The match was kind of weird. I did probably like it, maybe like 2% more than you did, but not by much, I would say. I did enjoy Steen on his entrance. He spent a lot of time, like, really loudly mocking a fan who has Delirious-style tape around his arms, yeah. Which, by the way, I don't know if you know what tefillin is, but I've always thought that it's like a thing that, like, religious Jews wrap around themselves, like when they pray. Look at it. It looks a lot like the Delirious arm tape. So I don't know. Maybe he's an Orthodox Jew for all I know.
I noticed the Steen thing too, and you know what was great is, like, not only did he mock him before the match, but did you see that after the match he like makes a big show of, he walks back down the aisle, and when he gets to that fan again, he makes a big production of unwrapping the tape right in front of that fan, like, look at this, I'm taking off the tape. Like, he's such a great asshole.
Yeah, no, he was great in the moments that he got to be featured.
Yeah, so I also have, like I said earlier, I have a bone to pick with the booking of this match, which is a couple things, actually. Like, first, I usually dislike the idea of the challenger for a world title match having to wrestle earlier in the night when the champion doesn't. Like, even as a little kid, I didn't like that. Like, I remember WrestleMania 10, where they did the thing where Luger and Hart both got world title shots that night, but Bret had to wrestle a second match to make it fair. I was like, this is the way it should always be done. As a little kid, I was like, I've only started watching wrestling for a year or so. I have very strong opinions about this. This is the way. And to this day, I don't like the imbalance of someone wrestles twice in a night and then the champion only has to wrestle once. To me, that's why would you give that advantage? But second, this is an example of setting a guy up to fail. On recent shows, the fans have liked, I would say they've liked Erick Stevens fine. On some shows, they've really liked him. But in this match, he was, I would say, the third, if not fourth most popular person in this match. And by tying the match to a title shot on the same night, the idea that, like, you know, whoever a match you fans in the building are going to see tonight is dictated by who wins this. You likely had fans hoping to see something like Steen versus Morishima, which would be booked 2 shows after this. And instead, they have Stevens win, and not just win, but he wins by pinning the other babyface in the match. So what does the crowd do as soon as Stevens wins? They boo him because they're disappointed. Like, I think if you had just booked Erick Stevens to have a world title match against Morishima on this show, or booked him to win a title shot against the BJ Whitmers of the world, I don't think the fans would have had a problem with Stevens on this night. But instead, you put him in a position where it feels like the fans don't feel like, oh, we're getting to see Erick Stevens versus Morishima. They're feeling like, oh, we have to settle for Erick Stevens versus Morishima. It's like it's a very clear example of how to set a wrestler up to fail in what should be a good thing for him.
On the one hand, I get your point. On the other hand, like, can't you argue that it's a better story for Stevens that he has this negative reaction and then wins the crowd over?
He does win the crowd over, but I just feel like I would have tried to protect. I wouldn't want to put him in the position where I have to now hope that he can salvage it. That, you know, because what if he didn't? Which, you know, like, I'll just go to the next segment just to make the point. After the match, Stevens and Delirious shake hands. Stevens grabs the mic, and as soon as he grabs the mic, some fans boo him some more. Some chant "shut the fuck up," while others chant "let him speak." Stevens says he wasn't the favorite to win tonight, and judging by the fans' reaction, he isn't who the fans wanted to see win. But tonight he faces Morishima for the RH World title. It's the biggest match of his career, and he promises he will not let people down. Like, I get the idea, Matt, like you just said, that in a way it sets him up to create a statement of like, hey, I won you over. But I just don't like I didn't like the optics of Stevens in the middle of the ring as this up and coming babyface saying like, yeah, I know you guys didn't want me to win, which I'm sure was on the fly, but like, I wouldn't feel good about putting a babyface in that position, you know?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I do think it ends up making the story better as it worked out.
And that brings us to Jimmy Jacobs, scored to the ring by Lacey, defeating Chris Hero, scored to the ring by Bobby Dempsey, Larry Sweeney, Sarah Del Rey, Tank Tolan. And Jimmy wins via submission in 16 minutes, 22 seconds, when he made him tap out to his new finisher of that DDT into the guillotine choke. Matt, long match. What'd you think about it?
Now, Jimmy Jacobs really is a city boy, born and raised in somewhere in Detroit. No, I don't know. Actually, I don't know. He might not be actually from Detroit proper. I don't know. He's from Michigan. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, this is what I thought this match was. Very basic heel versus face stuff. I mean, these two are total pros. So it was definitely solid work, and it was interesting to see Jimmy be the baby face in a match like this. But this is still kind of the mode where they're trying to do misdirection so you don't suspect what Jimmy's going to do the next night at Man Up. This is the first time we get to see Lacey happily in Jimmy's corner because, you know, the last time Jimmy wrestled was the cage match where Jimmy, where Lacey was still sort of like enraged at BJ Whitmer. So now she's just like in Jimmy's corner and in love with him, and he sings the entire chorus of the Ballad of Lacey to her while she blushes. So it is like this probably actually is the only time in ROH that we'll ever get to see that exact dynamic, because the following night their characters change completely, right?
Yeah.
So this is kind of interesting for that reason. Then Hero, comes out with the whole entourage. He spends a lot of the time bullying Bobby Dempsey, and Prazak reminds us that this is where Jacobs had the cage match against Whitmer, where he hurt his knee. And we also get a little bit of commentary talking about Sydal, because Sydal was going to have his final match in ROH the following night. And they frame it as Sweeney helped Sydal get a deal with, quote, Sweeney's good buddy Vince, which is pretty funny to think about, right? Like that Vince McMahon ever even heard of Larry Sweeney, never mind was good friends with him. So Hero doesn't stall immediately in this match. They do a wrist lock, and then Hero works out of that wrist lock, which with a series of rolls and flips and headstands and all sorts of stuff. And then he tells Bobby Cruz to tell the crowd that, quote, Hero would like to see any of you idiots try that. I never understood why announcers just said whatever the wrestlers told them to say. But in ROH, that has been established, so I guess it's fine. Yeah, so they keep it basic and on the mat for a while. The only flash coming from Hero's unnecessary showboating, he tumbles out of the ring, does jumping jacks, then he flips back into the ring. And Jacobs waits, but as soon as Hero turns around, Jacobs clothesline Hero over the top rope and then dives onto Dempsey and Hero. And Hero uses the distraction of Dempsey to run Jacobs into the guardrail, and that's when he takes over the match. And Hero, slows things down. There's, when Hero does his backwards roll into a twisting body press. This time when he did it, he yelled "Fancy Schmancy," which I did not know was the name of that move, but I like it. So from now on, I guess that's called Fancy Schmancy. The announcers, I thought, for their part, were really baby-facing Jacobs. Leonard was talking about how much he admires Jacobs' grit and determination for coming back from that injury and working hard to rehab his knee. So, I feel like that's all good storyline setup. You have some parts where Sweet and Sour Inc. get involved. Toland and Dempsey grab Jacobs' legs while Del Rey kicks him in the chest. Takes a while for Lacey to get involved to really help her out, to help Jacobs out from. But eventually, when Del Rey goes to kick Jimmy, Lacey jumps in and they start fighting, and that gets one of the bigger reactions of the match when Lacey hits her with a neck breaker. And then Hero puts Lacey on his shoulder, and Jacobs comes up from behind with a contra code, and Sweeney actually breaks up the pin, and they go back and forth, and eventually Jacobs walks up Bobby Dempsey to go for the contra code, but Hero avoids it, and so Jacobs locks on the guillotine choke to get the tap out. I was pretty surprised to see Hero tap out here. I definitely thought the match was longer than it needed to be. It was slower than I would have wanted. It wasn't particularly memorable, but I do appreciate the lengths they were going to make it seem like Jimmy Jacobs was set for a babyface run before doing the twist the next night. So I appreciated that. But as a match, I didn't think it was much.
Yeah, I thought this match kind of sucked. As always, the 2007 Chris Hero caveat applies that his act is very fun when you haven't seen it 12 times in a row. Although even there, I think he's done the act better. This is another one of those matches where he's done the act better in other recent matches. But this match is Hero largely dominating, doing his comedy shtick. And so I have issues with this. First issue with this match is I found like it was so one note. It has Jimmy's comeback at the very end, but otherwise this isn't worked in a way where it really feels like you're building to a comeback and I don't really feel like, oh, I'm getting so much sympathy for Jimmy with the way Hero's beating him. It's Hero does some wacky flips, then he hits a move. Occasionally Jimmy hits a move to break things up, continue until the Jimmy comeback. And I just felt like this match was 16 minutes of guys doing one thing before a finish. You could have gotten across the same effect in 10 minutes and made this feel like less of a slog, because I felt like this was just too long for the kind of match they were trying to have here. I also felt like Jimmy just didn't look great here. I know he's still coming back from a long injury layoff, but in this match, he looked winded in a match where he isn't doing much. I felt like his execution was a little off. At one point, he needs multiple tries to do the step-up Rana that he normally does without a problem, and Hero just has to stay bent over and wait for him to get it right. Jimmy's also calling spots super loudly in the middle of the ring at a couple points with zero attempts to hide it. It was just a weird night, I felt like, for him. And we get the usual sweet and sour interference that you talked about. And the usual abuse of Bobby Dempsey, Sweeney whipping him with a towel as he does push-ups. The most fun I had in this match was when Hero was being super chatty, like the fancy schmancy thing. That was a good thing. He does a move where he has Jimmy Jacobs sitting, and then he pins Jimmy's arms behind his back, and then Hero has spreads Jimmy's legs wide open facing Lacey, and then he yells to Lacey, "You like this, Lacey?" And I just felt like I can't think of a woman alive, no matter how much you would find your male partner attractive, like just a guy sitting down with his legs spread. I don't know if that's a great look. Like, I know he was doing that as a heel thing, but I just felt like I don't think there's any way where that can't be just humor. Like, I don't think that could ever not be a joke.
You're lucky because it was a joke. So,
but then Hero, this was my favorite part. This was even better to me than Fancy Schmancy. I forget what move it was for, but one point before one of the moves, Hero, before he goes to hit, it's one of his signature moves. I forget which one, but he goes, and I quote, specialty time.
I don't even remember that.
He goes like, specialty time. I just love specialty time. It's such a that is so great. Like, even when sometimes I get into, like, oh, okay, I've seen this little act too much. He always comes up with things like, specialty time. And I'm like, this is still good. But there have been matches this year where I've had similar criticisms that I have with this match. Things like, Hero's act kind of sucks all the oxygen away from his opponent, and it can be repetitive. But in a lot of those other matches, I'll make those criticisms, and then I'll say, I'm disappointed because this match wasn't as good as I felt it had the potential to be, but in the end, I was still entertained to some degree. This match is worse because I have the same criticisms, but on top of that, I don't feel the urge to say, but in addition to those criticisms, this match still entertained me. I was kind of bored watching this match, and I had those same kind of criticisms. So I would give this, for what's rare for me, because I think ROH in this era had such a high floor, a slight below average, which again, I don't do often.
So you think is the worst ROH match you've seen in a long time? Is that what you're saying?
It's you, when you were talking earlier, you said how, these guys are professionals, and that's true, but in a way that makes me almost be harsher to it, because like these two guys with 16 minutes, I expect to be, I was kind of shocked how bored I was by most of this match. And so, in a ways, technically we've probably seen worse matches than that in recent times, but they've been shorter, or I didn't expect them, or they were really, it's by no means a train wreck. I think a Hero newbie will enjoy it more, but I just felt like it whiffed. Like, after the match, Dave Prazak on commentary screams that Jimmy Jacobs is back and he's ready to be a major player in ROH. But to me, this match in isolation would give me the opposite impression. It's a match all about Hero, happened to win in the end, and he didn't look particularly good doing it. So I was kind of like the opposite of what they were trying to sell, as like, oh, this proves that he's really rising to a new level. But also, did you notice that during this match at one point, Chris Hero gets into an affair in the front row wearing a fedora, and Dave Prazak on commentary is like, get that stupid guy in the hat. I was like, whoa, but Hero's the heel here. And then, like, there's another match later where I think Marufuji interacts with the fan. He tries to grab the hat, and the fan doesn't let him. And Prazak again is like really, I don't know if Prazak knows that fan, but he was like really passionate, like, yeah, throw that hat away. Like he was pissed at this guy and his fedora. But yeah, so that's that match. After the match, Tank Tolan orders Bobby Dempsey to attack Jimmy. Jacobs puts him in the guillotine choke and refuses to let go as the rest of Sweet and Sour calmly walk away. ROH students have to pull Bobby free. You talked about how you liked how they were really selling the announcers, about Jimmy's being a babyface to try and do some misdirection. I like that they almost gave you a little tease of the next night, like to show you a little edge of, he's kind of not. They didn't go overboard with it, but right? Just a little bit of like, oh yeah.
It was vaguely subtle, like not completely subtle, but like, yeah, just that like this guy is not all there. Yeah.
Yeah, he isn't quite as happy as maybe he appears. That like he's trying to punish this guy now for attacking, not even attacking him, trying to attack him. And yeah, we sometimes talk about how Gabe Sapolsky, especially when he was on commentary, telegraphs things by pushing too far in the other direction. Like you just said, I think you said it right, like the subtle, like this was a rare example of ROH of like a subtle tease to the next thing, which I really enjoyed in that. We cut to Rebecca Bayless backstage. She walks up to Jimmy Jacobs and Lacey and asks how Jimmy's knee is doing.
One of the two times she does her promised post-match interview.
Jimmy says his knee is good. He's ready. He's ready. They're ready. It's not about tonight. It's about what happens next. And Lacey says that soon you'll all see. So I wonder, like, obviously this was a backstage promo that aired that was only seen to people that bought a DVD that came out after all of the storyline happened. But I wonder if you were watching this in real time, if that would have tipped it for you. The fact that, like, the show before the 161st show, Project 161, you have a guy saying that, like, the next thing you see is going to, be surprising. It's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like I obviously assume that anybody watching this at the time, at least, was probably aware of what had eventually happened before they saw it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But what people
DVD. Oh,
no, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, because every other DVD we've watched recently, we've talked about how, like, they've been going really hard to push in the opposite direction. This is the first time they've alluded to giving you any reason to think there might be something in store for Jimmy.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the people that would best be able to answer that are people that watched it like years later, removed from following the real-time results, and just watched the DVDs without spoilers. I'd be curious to know what they thought.
Yeah, that might be like 3 people on Earth, but if you're one of them, if you've ever been one of them, let us know. That brings us to our next match. In some ways, arguably, like, if I was just looking at this card on paper once Danielson had to pull out of the main event, this is the match that I would have been most excited for on paper.
Yeah, no, this is like the one match on the lineup that feels like it could actually sell tickets.
Yeah. Naomichi Marufuji defeated El Generico via pinfall in 20 minutes, 24 seconds after he hit the Super Shiranui off the top turnbuckle. I'd rate this match as a high good or a real strong 3.5 stars, maybe bordering on 3 3/4. Normally for these two, that would mildly disappoint me, but this match did not. And part of that might have been by this point in the show, I was really starved for a good wrestling match. So I was just like, oh, thank God, this is good. This is actively good. But I think a big part of it is how they worked it, because this is one of those matches I would say it isn't an A show match and it's not a B show match. I would call this a B plus match. I think Marufuji was excellent here in keeping people into a match that is 20 minutes long and had some somewhat slower moments. Like, I think I really noticed in this match, Marufuji is really great here in this match at having slower little sections and knowing exactly when to pick it up before settling it right back down. Like, his offense is tailor-made for that because so much of it is really flashy and explosive. So he can work a submission for a minute and meander just a bit. And then just before the crowd's attention might start to, like, wane, he'll pick the guy up, he'll hit like 3 moves, flashy moves, bang, 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 real quick in 15 seconds, and then he'll settle it back down again because like he feels very adept at knowing when to do a little tug to keep the fans on the hook. He's also very charismatic, and he's very good at picking little moments to engage the crowd without it being jarring, and he's confident enough to say, like, put on a fan's hat that he finds at ringside, not the fedora fan, but a different fan's hat. Or he'll chant ole, ole, ole himself, but it didn't come off as a heel thing. It came off more as just like a good-natured, like, ribbing of the crowd who was, into both guys, but, definitely into Generico. Generico, he spent a decent amount of this match on defense, but he's such a good seller and bumper that I felt like he was really compelling while being on defense, which I'd say was a sharp contrast to the Jimmy Jacobs performance earlier on the previous match, where he spent a lot of the match on defense, but I wasn't really compelled by it. I think Generico is very compelling in that role. And in this era, Generico continues to be a guy where if he is taking a move that calls for the wrestler taking it to do a 6 out of 10 bump, Generico seems like often he'll be like, if I can make this plausibly into if I could take a 9 out of 10 bump for this move, I will do that. And he does that often, like almost seems like one time in a lot of his matches in this era, where I would say in this match, Marufuji drop kicks him off the apron, and most wrestlers would just take a simple bump from the apron to the floor. Generico, instead, he launches himself all the way from the apron into the barricade, which in this building was, I would say, a decent distance away. And then he takes a second bump into a different barricade, and we see Generico with these couple brutally ugly welts from bumping into those. ROH's guardrails were infamous and really gnarly looking. And I thought that was just one of those examples we were seeing regularly at this point of Generico going the extra mile on bumps that a lot of guys would just take very routinely. And there's also a moment I really appreciate in this match where Generico is in an armbar. And watch his selling of an armbar. Generico does all the selling of this armbar with his hands. Just by watching his hands, you can see him go from almost tapping out to fighting through the pain and then becoming like more and more resolute that, oh no, I'm going to break out of this. He does all the selling for that sequence in his hands. And likewise, Marufuji works a headlock in this match, but he makes it fun. Like at one point, Generico ends up getting knocked to the floor, and Marufuji, after doing a headlock to Generico in the ring, he springboards over the top rope to the floor, and as he's like flying through there, he just lands perfectly in another headlock. And then with Generico in the headlock, Marufuji walks Generico to every one of the 4 ring posts and slams into each one. Generico takes great bumps for all of them. And sometimes I watch matches and I feel guilty for criticizing them because given how much skill and physical effort and sacrifice it takes to do a modern wrestling match. But this is one of those matches which did the opposite. It made me feel better about myself because it reminds me that I'm not always hard to please. Like I was like thinking about this match going, some of my favorite things in this match were a headlock and how a guy sold with his hands. Like, those aren't huge things. I'm not asking for the world here, but I think what I'm really praising in a match like this is wrestlers who take moves that for most people would be afterthoughts, a chance to catch their breath, and they put extra attention into them to keep you engaged. It's like when someone cooks you a meal with love, what does that actually mean? And what that usually means is when someone says, oh, I cooked this with love, obviously they love the person, but what it really usually means is they paid extra attention to every little detail that they easily could have gotten away with. Like, they put that extra work to make your experience 5% better here and 10% better here. They didn't have to do that to have a decent meal, but they paid extra attention in little moments. And then finally, I would say, this is a match where it could have gone to the finish 17 minutes in, and I felt like they had reached a clear point where fans would have been satisfied, but they gave you that extra 3 minutes, and that pushed things up one notch. And again, it's a B-plus match. It's not what I think what they would have done if they were in a GHC junior heavyweight title match at the Nippon Budokan, but it's what more than I think they had to do on a B show in Michigan. And I like the finish. I liked where Marufuji's going for the Super Shiranui on the top turnbuckle. Generico's fighting back and trying to go for the turnbuckle brainbuster. And they're fighting on the top rope, each trying to hit like their extra special, not every match, super finisher. And I like it's one of those kind of duels that ends the match where you're probably about to see the finish of the match. It's just a matter of who's going to be able to hit like their super duper finisher from that position. But overall, yeah, again, a really good B-plus match.
Trevor, how often do you make meals with love?
Not as often as I used to, Matt, but I will say this. A lot of my meals are very just like I prep things so I don't have to think much.
Yeah.
Especially that because that helps me eat healthy, where it's like if I make it easy, then it's easier to eat healthy. But I would say once a week I try and I'm going to cook for 60 minutes to 2 hours. I'm going to make something more involved, even if it's just for me, just because I feel like if I stop doing that, I kind of start feeling gross in a weird way. Like if you eat too many just reheated leftovers and stuff, sooner or later you have to get a little fancy schmancy.
Fancy schmancy. You roll before you put the oil in the pan. Do a little backflip first. Yeah, so the one thing I noticed about this match that I found interesting was Morishima's performance, because it felt like he was projecting a combination of casualness and intensity at the same time. Playful while also being aggressive in his offense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that goes to what I was saying too, where he knows when to let his foot off the gas and then when to put it back on.
But I think that's what made it not a Budokan main event. It's he wouldn't have added all the playfulness. There would be much less hat-related work in a Budokan main event. But this match had all the hat. But also, a springboard side headlock and a great spot where, like you mentioned, Generico was really struggling in the cross arm breaker. And those were the really fun final sequence, like the near fall where Marufuji caught Generico on the top rope, but Generico knocked him down and leap, but Marufuji hit a super kick on the way down and hit the Shiranui, and then Generico got his boot on the ropes. That near fall even got me, and the crowd was chanting "Ole Ole." Those are like some really hot near falls near the end, and the way they both did the coast to coast moves, like this definitely was a high effort match, and this is the sort of match you really want to see in ROH. Like if I was going to this show, I would be pretty disappointed with that lineup, except that this was on it. Like this is the sort of like dream. I don't know if it would have been considered a dream match in 2007, but like close enough. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And as the commentators point out, this is a match that had never been done anywhere before.
Right. So, and Generico wasn't pushed as one of the best wrestlers in the world at this point, but I think a lot of people still thought of him as one of the best wrestlers in the world, and certainly one of the best wrestlers working in United States-based promotions at that point. So it was really cool watching him have a first-time match against someone as decorated as Marufuji. And yeah, I thought this was, I mean, I'd probably rate it around the same as you, but I really appreciate that they booked this match at all. And I think that both guys gave a really fun performance. I think you could tell that Generico was treating it more as like one of the more important matches of the year for him, whereas Marufuji was having just more fun. But
yeah,
it still worked out to a very good match because they both complemented each other very well.
Yeah, and after the match, the crowd gives a standing ovation, so they really liked it, and a huge ROH chant before they do big chants for Marufuji and an Ole chant for Generico. Marufuji gets on the mic and he shouts Ole, Ole, Ole over and over again as he raises Generico's arm. And I was wondering what your opinion on this, because for all I know, Gabe maybe said, really put Generico over in losing afterwards. But to me, this felt like spontaneous. Like it was a nice gesture. It almost felt like to me, it felt like this was spur of the moment. I really liked that match. I know the fans really like this guy. I'm going to grab the mic and try and put this guy over and make a big effort to it. Because I just felt like the way those two interacted with each other after the match, it felt like they were really happy with the match. It seemed like to me.
Yeah, it felt like Marufuji was very impressed with Generico because as great as Generico was, I don't know how much of like a rep he had in Japan as far as like, oh, this guy's one of the best. Like I know he had worked in Japan, I think at that point, but I don't know if like this was somewhere where Marufuji was like, oh, you're really good. I want to make sure that I put you over, or if he kind of knew what to expect already. I don't really know, but it definitely seems sincere to me. But wrestlers are actors to some degree, so who knows?
Exactly. It is now intermission, and Rebecca Bayless is backstage with the resilience of Austin Aries.
Not a post match interview, just to be clear.
No, we can barely hear her because the PA is blaring music during intermission, and it is bleeding through the walls here or wherever she's at. Aries talks about how big a deal it is that the Resilients have 2 different title shots tonight. They've taken their bumps, but they're breaking through. He says in the second last show they'll be a stable together. Eric says this is the biggest night of not just his career, but his entire life. So putting some big stakes on the line here. This is like a 4th of July barbecue, Matt. That's how big the stakes are.
And you just put them on like a clothesline and just like let the sun cook them? Is that why you said they're putting them on the line? Yeah, Matt Cross has nothing to say, sadly.
Exactly. And that brings us first match back after intermission. How do you get the fans back after intermission? You do BJ Whitmer and Brent Albright escort to the ring by Shane Hagedorn, defeating Claudio Castagnoli and Nigel McGuinness in 16 minutes and 32 seconds when Albright pinned McGuinness after a half Nelson suplex. Matt, what do you think about this match?
Well, I can already tell what you thought of it, but while I get what you're saying about Whitmer and Albright, I do think that McGuinness and Castagnoli are a decent way to get the crowd back after intermission. And, I can tell that you didn't love this match. I liked it, I think, a little bit more than I thought I would. There was obviously, the Hangman 3, who I think, at least at this point, they still never said their name, right?
No, on the show, they're the Hangman 2, yes, featuring Shane Hagedorn. There is no Pierce for this show. I don't think he's not on Man Up, is he, or is he? I don't even remember.
I don't remember. there might, maybe there's like conflicts related to the NWA title. I don't know. I'd have
But
to.
I thought that was a little weird. I mean, I get that you can't book everyone because of availability and, sometimes for even financial things. But like, I thought it was a little weird on this show where they had just formed the Vulture Squad. Jack Evans has to work the show alone. And the Hangman 3 are still like a relatively new thing. As you mentioned, they haven't even have their name yet. And there's no Adam Pearce there.
Yeah, they are both wearing the Executioner hoods, which I think Albright has worn before, right? But
Yeah.
it's new for Whitmer. And of course, we get a new look, BJ Whitmer. He definitely did badly need to cut his hair, so I think that's an improvement. But I don't know if he could have looked any more like mid 2000s than with like the blonde dye and the really darkly dyed goatee. I don't know, man. I do that. I do that. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna, did his goatee have like little streaks of blonde in it too? Because
Yes.
for those who don't see this match, he cut off his long hair he's had an entire ROH run, dyed it like a really unnatural blonde, and now has a goatee with these little blonde, like he's like a Scott Steiner stripes in it.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely looks like a heel. I will say that. It's hard to imagine anyone cheering a guy who looks like that. So I don't know. Whatever. It's a new look. I think it's probably was the right move at the time. But yeah, as far as the match, I like how Nigel's been doing these wacky roll-up exchanges early in his matches, where the 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Like usually that comes like in a more dramatic point in matches, but we've watched a couple matches recently where Nigel's done them like at the beginning, and I kind of like it as a change of pace. He's really been enjoying doing that. We get moments where Whitmer is trying to show himself be more heelish, like where Nigel goes for a handshake, but instead Whitmer knocks Claudio off the apron and then slaps Nigel in the face while Albright attacks him from behind. I can see that the Albright and Whitmer are still not the most charismatic heels in the world. Hagedorn gets involved, where Albright throws him to the outside, and Hagedorn puts the boots to him before throwing him back in the ring. We get Albright and Whitmer doing a Briscoe-style double shoulder tackle, but you would be shocked to know it's not as good as the one the Briscoes do. But I still enjoyed it to some degree because I really enjoyed Nigel and Claudio. The crowd eventually, after a long match, gets loud as they start to chant Claudio's name as he's trying to fight his way out of the Albright Whitmer corner as they get the heat on him for a while. And he tries to crawl for Nigel, but Albright pulls at his feet. I thought that spot was funny because I know that Claudio was a big guy, but someone as strong as Albright could definitely pull Claudio back. But in this scenario, he doesn't. He's pulling at Claudio's leg away from Nigel, but Claudio is able to power all the way across the ring, far enough so he could reach out and tag Nigel for what I would describe as a warm tag. Yeah, but do you agree that like Albright could pretty easily, if he had Claudio by the leg, stop him from getting across the ring to tag in Nigel?
Yeah, and I just felt like that was a disappointing, like warm tag's a good way to put it, because I think normally you would want like the hot tag, like you would expect Nigel to do an Inzagiri or something to have like a noticeable move. Instead, it's just like it's like a weird minor tug of war with the foot, and then he just pops through and tags.
Yeah. And so he gets the tag. And by the way, the other thing I want to mention is I do think that Whitmer and Albright definitely made a point to show a lot of extra aggression and cruelty in this match. They're just like, when they kick somebody, they do it aggressively and repeatedly. When they punch somebody, they do it aggressively and repeatedly. Stomping aggressively and repeatedly. Like, they definitely were making a conscious effort to be like, we're going to be really intense here. It's not like, comparing to some other strikes from some other wrestlers, it's not as good, but I do appreciate the effort. And then the final sequence, once Nigel does do his warm tag, it gets pretty fun. Claudio especially, I think, was the standout in this match. He does that awesome tope he's been doing onto Whitmer. Claudio's kind of all over the place. Albright's ducking the jawbreaker lariat and locking the crowbar, and Claudio's there to break it up. And then Claudio takes a pretty nice little backbreaker by Albright. Uh, he eventually hits a springboard. A springboard uppercut. He catches Whitmer coming off the top rope with a power bomb, and then Hagedorn sneaks up behind and gets caught in the giant swing. I thought that Claudio was just kind of all over the place, making a lot of motion and excitement. Um, at a certain point, Whitmer does a suplex combo into a power bomb on Castagnoli, but Nigel comes in and lariats Whitmer, but that allows Albright to come up from behind with a half Nelson suplex on Nigel for the clean win. I was really surprised by that finish because Nigel's about to win the title a few shows after this. And does Albright ever get a singles title shot against McGuinness?
No, I was going to bring this up. I think he gets one in I looked up on Cage Match. I think he gets one in early 2009 for the Gabe Sapolsky era. I mean, I made a note about this. Let me just look down, see if I can find it.
Early 2009 would not have anything to do with this particular finish.
Yeah. Okay. I my note I made was Albright and Nigel wrestle I wrote in my notes that you would think that this would make sense for Albright to win right before Nigel becomes champ to set up a future title shot, but they have one non-title. Albright and Nigel are in the same non-title four-way in May of 2008, and they don't wrestle each other again until 2009.
Yeah, so that's a really weirdly booked finish. But I would say that I did enjoy the finishing sequence. I enjoyed Whitmer and Albright's aggression. Yes, the match was too long, but I thought it was all right. And I don't think that I would say I was bored at certain points, but I was not. I was entertained for a decent amount of the match.
I probably did like this match a little less than you, but I did not dislike it as much as Hero and Jacobs. I will say I felt like if the last match was cooked with a little bit of love, this was a match cooked from a can while you were half distracted, which I've done way more often in life. It's got the solid structure of a tag, but I felt like the pieces were done in a way that made me not care about the fact that it was structurally sound. Like the heels dominate most of the match. They set up for the babyface comeback in the final minutes, except that the heels dominate, which I thought what I thought was largely plotting, brawling. Although I did notice, like you said, that they were a bit more aggressive, which I appreciate, but not aggressive enough to really grab my attention. They also did submission work that went nowhere. What you would call a warm tag, which I agree on, that whole grab the foot thing. But I felt like the action after the hot tag was fine, like you said, where Claudio zips all over the place. I love in this era the Claudio gets the zoomies, where he just goes through a sequence where he's going to start going all over the ring for 45 seconds. He's going to do a tope. He's going to jump off the top rope and do a European uppercut. He's going to run the ropes. I just love he's one of the most fun guys in this era at just I'm going to do 45 seconds and just spaz out. He's really fun. But then Shane Hagedorn gets in the ring, and this is something that annoyed me in this match. Shane Hagedorn gets in the ring, and ref Paul Turner, he does nothing about it. He stands there openly staring at Shane Hagedorn getting in the ring, but not even raising an objection. And as soon as Claudio, attacks, does his bit with Hagedorn, Turner, the ref Paul Turner yells at Claudio, not Hagedorn, stop it, Claudio. And then, you're not the legal man. You have to leave the ring. Then Nigel does a spot with Hagedorn. And again, Turner just watches it dispassionately. And it's only after all of Hagedorn's scheduled spots for the match are done that that the ref, finally cares. It's okay, Hagedorn, you have to get out of the ring. It was just such a weird, it was obvious he knew, it's not his time to leave yet. So I'm not even going to do the pretense of telling him to leave. But yet I'm going to tell other wrestlers to leave when it's their time to leave. It was weird in a way that just annoyed me. And like you, again, I thought that finish, why you have Albright go over Nigel clean when like you said, when he's about to win the world title and you don't have any title match come from it, that's weird. I'd call this a very low average based on general competency and its final few minutes, but my God, it is kind of amazing to me that a few months before this with the Jimmy Jacobs feud, Whitmer was having one of the hottest, if not the hottest run of his whole career. And then just weeks before this match, Albright was having some of his career highlights with the Morishima matches. And you put those two guys together, and on a night like this, in a match like this, any momentum they had feels like it has instantly evaporated. Like it feels like they are right back to where they were, before any of that. It's crazy how quickly it just goes away. The Hangman 3, something about it is just people say a heat magnet. This is like an anti-heat anti-magnet. It is, credit to the wrestlers, to the fans though. So we've seen, how many times have we seen on through the years, even, ROH fans were supposed to be more civilized, where you've heard at least a couple fans in shows be kind of xenophobic. There were fans in this match that they chanted, "Let's go Europe," for Nigel and Claudio against the heels from America, and I appreciated that. I wrote my notes. I would chant that during Danielson's theme, but they did not.
Yes,
but
very
still,
nice.
I appreciate for once they were like, you know what, we're going to. They're baby faces, so we're going to celebrate where they come from. I enjoyed that. But next up, street fight. Although not originally depicted to be a street fight, as we'll find out. Jack Evans defeated Rocky Romero via pinfall in 14 minutes, 20 seconds after he hit his top rope double knees through a table. This is the blow-off to the injury angle they did a few months earlier where Rocky, quote-unquote, not really, concussed Jack with a kick to the head. They hadn't really built to it well, though, so when they got to this match and talked about the history, it came off to me as more as like one of those matches that makes you go, oh yeah, that angle happened months ago, rather than like, oh, I'm really anticipating this blow-off.
Yeah, let me ask you something. Jack mentions that Roderick replaced Rocky Romero in the cage match at Cage Rage. Did they announce Jack Evans versus Rocky Romero first before they made it Jack against Strong? Because I don't remember that at all.
I don't know, but it really, I should have looked that up, but it really did sound like that, didn't it? And I don't think, I think Rocky was working Japan at that point probably, because I don't think he was on those shows. So right. That would make sense that maybe he was like a last minute booking. He was like, look, I have to take this. So I could definitely see that being the case. But, and like I mentioned earlier, right, the show after he forms the Vulture Squad, no Julius Smokes, no Ruckus here, which I felt was, I know a lot of times with these ones where guys have to travel to these B shows that are more in the Midwest, they don't they try and cut costs a little bit. I feel like the show after you form a new stable, could you at least spring for Julius Smokes to make the trip down? For all I know, maybe Julius Smokes had something come up, but if there was ever a time to like spring for Smokes to come to, Detroit, Chicago, I would have made it this weekend.
I mean, they had to fly in like Chasen Rance and Kenny King, right? Like they don't live in Michigan. Exactly. I feel like they maybe would take less of a priority.
Yeah. So Rocky attacks Jack as Jack is making his entrance. When Jack recovers, he gains control for a couple minutes. He gains control a couple minutes into this match. And he gets on the mic as soon as he gets control and kind of has Rocky reeling. And he says, like Matt just said, you don't have the guts to face me in a cage, and Roddy had to take your place. So yeah, I do think you must be right. Jack said he heard Detroit is a city that doesn't like rules. It's a city that likes to take it to the streets. So he's demanding that this match right here, right now, becomes a street fight. And so that's what becomes the rest of the match. And this was a match where I felt like it was full of missed opportunities, but it still had enough positives that I enjoyed it. I did feel like in the opening minutes of this, once it became a street fight after the mic work, Jack showed some decent fire, which on the big list of Jack Evans' strengths isn't usually one of them, like really fiery babyface offense. But as the match continued, I felt like some flaws started to emerge. Jack is the guy who wanted to make this a street fight, for example, yet every weapon in this match, which I think amounts to 2 chairs and a table, is introduced by Rocky. Like Jack never really goes for a weapon in this match, even though he wants a street fight. They do brawl to the back of the building just long enough so Jack can do his run up the wall flip spot that he did at the ROH show in Osaka. So maybe that's one of the main reasons they made it a street fight, just so he could do that. And then we get to some of the missed opportunities, because the whole story of this feud is Rocky's giving Jack a work concussion with a kick to the head and Jack missing some time because of it. And so in this match, Rocky hits Jack with another kick to Jack's head, exactly like the one that they did the injury angle with. It feels like it should be this big moment, the centerpiece of the match. Maybe there's a huge near fall where Jack kicks out to show like, this time I'm going to fight through it. But no, like Rocky hits it, doesn't even cover Jack. I think he just immediately goes outside to set up to get a table, which is, I was just like, it's so weird that this whole feud is built around that one spot. You repeat the spot, and it's just like a reason so Jack can sell a bit to set up some plunder. And then we also have Rocky take the time to grab a chair and wedge it between the middle and top turnbuckles in one corner. So I'm like, okay, they're setting up for a big spot here. And then the match goes on for a minute or two, and you keep wondering, like, oh, what's the payoff going to be? And the payoff, the only time in the match this comes into play is at one point, Rocky hits a jumping knee to Jack's chest. Jack stumbles back into the corner that has the chair wedged in it, and he takes a very minor bump where it almost is like the chair being there was incidental to the bump. I was like, was that the whole plan? Like, it was just a weird thing to go to that trouble for such a minor thing that didn't really play into the match or wasn't like a big sea change. We also get Rocky hitting Jack's leg with a chair shot against the ring post where 90% or more of the chair was clearly hitting the ring post and not near the leg. We get the classic plunder finish where the match slows to a crawl so Rocky can go outside, he can get a table, he can take it back in the ring, set it up. I did like that one point where Rocky tries to put Jack through the table. Jack counters, and so Rocky jumps off the top turnbuckle over the table, and then Jack kicks him in midair. And I really thought that was cool because I was just thinking, if I'm in Rocky's position, I have to really judge my jump where I need to jump far enough to easily clear the table, but be in position to take this midair drop kick and also have enough room to bump backwards and not hit the table. And I thought that was like, oh, there's some mental calculus he had to do there, and he pulled it off really well. So I would say overall, like for all the places this match could have gone, which I think would have been really fun places, they didn't go to most of them, but where they did go was still decently fun. Jack took a couple crazy bumps. He did his flips. It wasn't a street fight for the ages, but I would consider this, don't judge this as a street fight. Judge this as a regular Jack Evans match that just has a couple extra stipulation spots like the wall run and the table break finish. And you'll be decently happy with this. I would give this a flat good rating right down the middle.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I thought there was a lot to like. The crowd was very into it, and they weren't very into everything on this show. And they did feel like they didn't like each other, like you said. So I appreciated that. The things I didn't like, yes, you're right about the big spot with the, the kick. Like they could have played that up more. That's not really what got my attention. I never really love crowd walk spots, like the walk-in brawls. I feel like a lot of times when ROH, they did a lot, like every street fight had to have a crowd brawl during this era. And they're rarely particularly good. Sometimes they're more fun than others, but this time, they threw each other on chairs. That was cool. But then they to get to the back where Evans did his wall flip, Romero just had to grab him in a side headlock and walk him back there. And then Evans did the same thing to bring Romero back to the ring. I never really liked the headlock and walk spots, which were made very popular, I guess, during the 90s and the Attitude Era and stuff like that. One thing that was funny, though, is that when they got back to ringside and Evans tried the 450 off the guardrail, Romero moved, so Evans landed on the floor, but you never actually see Romero in the camera angle of any of that. So you just basically see Jack Evans stand on the guardrail and then just do a 450 onto nothing. At no point do you see a wrestler move. So it just makes it seem like Jack just made a choice to flip onto the floor, like for funsies. I also think that the setting up the table hurt the momentum of the match a little bit. It didn't really seem particularly necessary other than to justify the stipulation,
Yeah.
Like, yes, the double knees on the table was kind of cool, but not really cooler than just the Tree of Woe double knees, So it just like kind of ground the match to a halt. Also, did you notice that when Romero was pulling out the table at the end, he pulled out a ladder first, and in a Jack Evans versus Rocky Romero match, I definitely think that they could do more fun stuff with a ladder than they could with a table. But he just kind of ignored the ladder and grabbed the table. So I thought that was funny. But every time there's a match, whether, to this day, where someone has to leave the ring to like look around under it for a weapon, I always feel like takes me out of the match. Like a real brawl, someone's not going to be like, all right, you just rest up for 45 seconds while I go find some stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to pick on like this match in particular as the most egregious offender because it's far from it, and we see it all the time still. But just a little minor ding. But yeah, no, I thought they had good energy, and the crowd was into it, and I thought it was a fun match.
Also, I want to point out one more thing, the most important thing, which was at some point during this match, a fan, you can hear shouts out, Rocky fears Silver King. So I like you got some real deep wrestling nerds here, like pulling out the foreign feuds of Rocky Romero. So
that's what ROH is all about.
King. Yeah. We cut to Rebecca Bayless outside the building, and I want to point out at this juncture that almost every promo tonight has had either excessive wind noise that was outside or sound blaring in the background if it was inside. Just horrible choices all around here.
Also, this is the second of two of Rebecca Bayless's promised post-match interviews, and of course, all she has to say is, "Do you have anything to say about the match?" I gotta wonder, is it sexist that I feel more guilty making fun of Rebecca Bayless's interviews than I do, let's say, making fun of Mark Nolte or Donnie B or Gabe's commentary? Like, is it like, does it mean that I'm like holding her to different standards? I guess part of it is just, I feel like she's just badly produced, whereas those other guys were just sort of like doing their own thing. That's why I feel more guilty making fun of her. And also, I'm guessing, like, I don't know, like, just like this was a position she was like thrown into, and it just doesn't seem like she was prepared well for it. And I don't necessarily think that's her fault. You know what I mean?
I feel like we have gone a little easier on her than we would a man, but then again, the way women have been treated in Ring of Honor since the beginning,
including Becky, by the way.
Yeah, they kind of deserve some grace, but I will say, no, she's not good at this. She doesn't have interesting questions, and her reaction to everything is to kind of just give you a stare that is 50% what the heck and 50% kind of annoyed. There is an art to the post-match interviewer, and she is not Mean Gene Okerlund. She's not Renee Paquette. She's not even Gary Michael Capetta, I would say. She's just kind of an empty vessel. And
I feel like even Sugar Sean Price asked like kind of specific questions, at least. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and so yeah, that she is, and the fact that they're making her, the person that introduces you to each show, even though oftentimes they don't have anything for her to say, as we saw on this show, in the introduction, or do just like, hey, I'm going to be around later. And she's not a person that at this point in her life has the ability to kind of riff and make that work where maybe someone else could. And so, yeah, it's a combination of she's not probably having the greatest producing or material, and she doesn't have the talent to make up for that. So, you can have one of those two things. You can't have both of them together. But so for this one, Rebecca finds Jack Evans. Jack says when Rocky got that table, he knew it was playing right into his hands, and he says nothing can stop the Vulture Squad from rising. So yeah, these are the great tidbits we're getting backstage. But that brings us to the ROH World Title match. Takeshi Morishima successfully defends the title when he defeats Erick Stevens via pinfall in 10 minutes 53 seconds when he hit a backdrop driver. Now, before I throw it to you, Matt, I also want to ask a question to you, because I'm kind of wondering something watching this match from our last episode, where last episode you read an excerpt from Bryan Danielson's book where he said the belief with inside ROH at the time was Morishima was too gentle against the younger guys, hence Bryan kicking him so hard that he got legitimately pissed and went after him. Part of me wonders if that's why, like, the back chunk of Morishima's title reign is, other than Danielson, pretty much exclusively against heavyweights. Like, it's Claudio, it's Albright, it's Claudio and Albright in a three-way. Then it's Danielson, who kicks him until he treats him like a heavyweight. Then it's Erick Stevens here. Then it's Danielson again. Then it's Kevin Steen. And then it's Nigel McGuinness again to end the reign. So it's nothing but heavyweights. I was thinking, part of me is like, was that like a decision where somewhere they realized if this guy is too soft on the smaller guys, we'll just book him against every big guy on the roster? But then I started thinking, well, that could also just be who's left to face him, because they had already done the Aries and Roddy defenses early in the reign. I guess they could have done. When I was thinking, who's the smaller guys left on the roster that they could have?
Jack Evans.
Yeah, I was Jack Evans, maybe Davey Richards, El
Yeah.
Generico, maybe Delirious. Even I don't know, but like
Delirious,
so.
they definitely could have done Delirious. Like
Yeah.
they certainly have done it plenty of times in the past.
So yeah, I was just wondering. So yeah, what do you think about the match? Also, like, do you think that was conscious decision, or is it just the way the booking fell that like the end of his reign is just it's going to be heavyweights and Danielson all the way to the end?
I never thought about it before, so I'd have to think a little bit more. It seems like they were all just like up and comers that Gabe was trying to get over, and having a competitive title match was a way to get somebody over. And
Yeah,
Morishima turned out to be really good at doing this, of like making these up and comers look really good, right? Like bumping around for
yeah,
these guys. Um, this match was sort of like a miniature version of the Claudio and Albright matches, wouldn't you say? Like it was shorter. It was sort of like playing the hits a little bit, so
yeah.
it didn't seem as impressive, I guess, or it didn't seem as noteworthy, but it was still fun, and the crowd still really ate it up. I really liked that Stevens, like, it was kind of a funny way to start the match because it was one of those matches where, like, as soon as the bell rang, Stevens attacked right away, but he attacked with a side headlock. So it was like I'm going to start the match hot and heavy, but just grabbing the side of your head really hard. But then, of course, they start shoulder blocking each other, and Morishima gets the better of it, but then Stevens does a leaping one, and then he does one off the apron, and right after that, Stevens is like, "Yeah, what do you think of that?" Like he's just like, "Hey," like he's trying to get the crowd to really be impressed with his shoulder blocks. Um, and it takes a little bit of time for the crowd to get invested in Stevens. But they do, like after a few minutes, when Stevens does the like I would call it the ole ole choo choo on the floor, where he runs into Morishima on the floor, and then we get a dueling chant. I'd say for that moment on, the crowd is fully invested in Stevens winning. He does a half crab with a knee to the back. He does another choo choo, and Morishima, keeps like avoiding the doctor bomb. And then there's a spot where Stevens avoids the first backdrop driver attempt and is able to get a TKO on Morishima, which pops the crowd. But more importantly, it really excites Dave Prazak. Like, it was one of the most enthusiastic commentary sequences from Dave Prazak that I've heard in a while. And I'm like, oh, this must be the first recording of a taping cycle, right? Like, because we hear about those marathon recording sessions where they just get
Yeah.
more and more tired. This must be like the first one because he's not gonna get like that on recording 3. And I guess it makes sense because this is the first show in 3 weeks, so it would be the first show they recorded in a while. um but we get what we see in a lot of those Morishima versus big guy matches, which is a bunch of near falls after power moves. Stevens hits a German suplex followed by a lariat. He gets an even bigger reaction for the doctor bomb. And then, and I wrote at this point, like, Morishima has done it again with his selling, getting his opponent over huge. A big Stevens chant at that point. Then Steven goes for another German suplex, but Morishima falls butt first onto him for a 2 count. And then Stevens avoids a backdrop driver and hits a side headlock takeover for a 2 count. And Prazak says, "Whoa, almost a new champion with a side headlock takeover." And I was like, Jesus, once again, our through the years viewing parallels current events. That was that really stood out to me. I don't know. Did you notice that as you watched?
I didn't because I might have watched that ahead of that match ahead of the side Ted Lake. But when you say that, like it's been a few shows since we had one of those, but yeah, that is goddamn crazy because how many world title matches in modern history have ended with that? And how many times have announcers said that? Like, we're getting like a 1v1 here
Yeah.
of linking these moments up.
I know. I mean, like, it's very rare to have a big near fall with a side headlock takeover, never mind a victory with one. But yeah, and then right after that, Morishima hits the lariat for a 2 count, and then, as usual, follows it with the backdrop driver and gets the win. So, like I said, a miniature version of the match Morishima has been having, and since we've seen it before, it felt like nothing new, but it is genuinely impressive how well Morishima is able to get over these challengers who, before the match, seem like they have no chance. And I do think that Stevens, for his part, brought a lot of energy and felt charismatic enough to stoke the fans' desire for a title change. So I know that you weren't crazy about the booking of the 4-way, but I do think this turned into a very good night for him. And I'd say his best night since coming to Ring of Honor.
I felt like this match was a tale of two halves. The first half, I felt like it was yet another match where Stevens was selling too much. I will say, though, Morishima was not throwing weak strikes on this night. If Brian was worried about that during his match, he wouldn't have had to worry in this match, because I felt like there was Morishima threw some big clubbing forearms that made real contact in this match. He threw a hard kick or two like he did in the Danielson match once he got pissed. But still, halfway through this match, I felt like it could have been any generic Morishima match from earlier in his reign. But then this second half, they flipped from giving most of the offense to Morishima to most of the offense to Stevens. And that's where I felt like you were saying, they followed like the mini version, the speed run of the later stage Morishima against big boys title match formula that we've seen work so well. Where Stevens just starts tossing Morishima around, as you talked about. And the more Stevens tosses him around, the more the crowd likes him, and the more they get into this match. You know, he does a power slam, a German suplex, TKO, Dr. Bomb. And you talked about how at first it took a few minutes for the crowd to get into Stevens. I think it's after that first big, I think it was a power slam, the first move where he really takes him down. And it's like a switch flips for the crowd, where that's the first time they really pop for him. And once that happens, they're like, oh, he is cool. This is fun to watch. Let's get behind this guy. Let's get over whatever, disappointment we had about who won that four-way. This is going to be fun. And it is. For the second half of the match is pretty gosh darn fun. They start to chant for him. And it's another match on the show where I like the ending. I like Stevens going to throw Morishima I'm going to throw Morishima like he had done so much in the second half of the match. He goes to that well once too often. He tries a second German after he successfully hit one earlier. And this time Morishima shifts his weight and just splats him. I like Stevens countering the first backdrop driver into a cradle. That caught me off guard in a good way. Overall, although it's a very different match than Marufuji versus Generico, I'd probably rate it the same, like a really high, good 3.5 on the borders of 3 3/4. And like you, I agree. It's not on the level of Claudio and Albright's matches, but it's a quality match that ends in a similar place stylistically. So yeah, a mini version of those matches is a good way to put it. In a way, I'd almost say like, if you watched these 3 matches that we've reviewed recently on Through the Years, maybe you should watch this one first, because then you're going to end with the even better ones, rather than the feeling we have, which is like, oh, this is good, but it's kind of like a reduced fat version of what we've enjoyed recently. Maybe you and I would have enjoyed this more even, but, Dave Meltzer wrote in The Observer, kind of going to your point about this, Matt, where Dave wrote, crowd was real upset Stevens getting the title shot. However, Morishima did a great job in the match, because by the time the match was over, crowd cheered Stevens wildly after he lost. I will say, if I was Eric, like, I think you mentioned this during your review, Matt, that like Morishima did a really good job here. And he did. He probably did more than half of the work in getting him over. But if I was Stevens at home reading that, I'd be like, Morishima did a great job. Like you just read that, makes it sound like Stevens did nothing. But no, Stevens pulled his weight. And
yeah, he definitely pulled his weight. He definitely pulled his weight.
And he pulled Morishima's weight at some points, literally.
Yes.
But, after the match, so Morishima helps Stevens to his feet. He shakes his hand. He raises his arm. So it's almost like the Marufuji Jericho match, where it feels like, oh, the big foreign talent is going out of their way to be like, hey, this guy did good, everybody. I want you to know that I feel that way. He leaves, so he leaves Stevens alone in the ring, so Stevens can kind of get his flowers. Eric, the crowd starts chanting for Erick Stevens. I wrote in my notes, Eric should yell at them, if you don't love me at my worst, you can't have me at my best. But he doesn't do that. He's nicer than that. He just yells, did I keep my promise? And he slaps a bunch of fans' hands. So it
would be a good fodder for a heel turn if he did do that promo.
Yeah, that would be a great heel thing, but no, he is a very grateful, humble babyface here. Next, we get an ad for FIP Dangerous Intentions 2007 with an I Quit match between Davey Richards and Roderick Strong for the FIP heavyweight title, and a tag battle between the Briscoe brothers and the team of Madman Pondo and Necro Butcher, plus matches including Colt Cabana and Shingo, because this is a show from fucking February 2nd, over 7 months before this ROH show. So we continue to delight in the very delayed FIP DVD releases and the late ads that come for them. But that brings us to the main event, the ROH World Tag Team title match. The Briscoes, Jay and Mark, successfully defend the titles when they defeat the resilience of Austin Aries and Matt Cross in 19 minutes, 16 seconds, when Mark pinned Cross after a spiked Jay Driller. I felt like this was one of the least enjoyable Briscoes title defenses that I've seen. Their base effort level is so high that I would still rate this as above average, but maybe not even good, which I think is pretty gosh darn. Why am I saying gosh darn so much today? It's pretty disappointing.
Because you gosh darn enjoy saying it, Trevor.
This is about as close as I've come to seeing the Briscoes mail it in. I don't think they mailed it in, but this is about as close. The Briscoes, I've said many times, they're one of the most consistently hardworking acts I've seen, at least in the last 30 years of wrestling. This is about as close as I've seen them to being on autopilot. It's still action, action, action. The crowd's largely subdued. The final few minutes of the match are bigger than what came before it, but by comparison to the closing stretches of most Briscoes matches of this era, it's pretty tame. And again, maybe if I hadn't seen so many Briscoes matches from this era, I'd enjoy this more. But it was watching this match for me, after watching so many of their matches, was like being someone that had developed a 40 pill a day drug addiction, being given 2 for an entire night. Like, this maybe would have been enough to get me through at one point, but 2 doesn't even get me tingling anymore, man. I need a black tiger
Trevor,
bomb neck.
I feel like people should just listen to the show to see what analogies you come up with, because you are the analogy king. I feel like when this podcast is over, you should just have a show called Analogies.
But really, because what I talked about earlier, Matt, about like how sometimes when I watch matches, I feel guilty for criticizing them. This is one of those kind of matches because there is a certain amount of physical effort and athleticism here that is admirable. But I was just thinking, like, the level you guys have consistently set is so high. This isn't enough for me anymore. Like, the floor is higher than this, and that's your fault, for what my expectations are. And that is kind of the problem the Briscoes have created for themselves in this era, where they do one style of match over and over and over. They do it very well, but they're competing against themselves every night out. Like, if I make an amazing pizza, Matt, for you, and I cook it for you once a month, and maybe here's another analogy for you, and make you other things for the other 29 days of the month, I don't have to absolutely nail that pizza to perfection to impress you, because it's going to be novel to you. You're only getting once a month. But if I make that pizza for you every day, I do have to nail it, because you're getting that pizza so often, it's really going to jump out at you if it's like 10%. If I leave off the freshly cut basil, DeFara style, Matt, you're going to notice if I've been making it for you that way for 2 weeks,
Sorry, Trevor. I wasn't paying attention, because once you started that, I was immediately on the phone ordering a pizza.
But so yeah, this is one of the ones that makes me feel guilty, because it's like and the thing is, I don't have much to say about this match itself, like what happened during it, because it's a meal I've had a lot of that's slightly off. Aries and Cross do a version of Jack and Roddy's Ode to the Bulldogs, but with a double stomp off the guy's back instead of a flying move, and I thought that was pretty cool. But this was below the bar the Briscoes had set for themselves. This was below the bar ROH main events had generally set for themselves. It was just a very meh way to end the show, I would say.
Yeah, I did think like they were working really hard. I thought that it was action packed the whole time, but I thought things seemed maybe like 1% off for me for much of the match. Like, there was just things that didn't congeal. And I thought that the last 2 minutes were incredibly exciting and like at the level that you'd want from the Briscoes. But it was 2 minutes of a 19-minute match. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I thought Aries actually looked very good right from the beginning. But there's something about Matt Cross that just didn't work in ROH. And it's very hard to pinpoint, because I know that M-Dog 20 has like gotten over and been popular in many indies over the years, right? But What do you think it is that made it so he just didn't click in ROH? Because I do think that's the thing that was the wild card in this match. I think that the Matt Cross stuff just didn't really work as well as what everyone else was wrestling. And I can't even say he was doing anything like bad. Like, I just don't know. There was just something about him that didn't click in ROH from the beginning.
Yeah, the thing I keep coming back to, and it's pretty vague, so I don't know if this will scratch the itch for answers you're looking for here, but Sometimes people go, "Oh, that wrestler has it," that kind of unquantifiable extra thing. I would say like a wrestler recently that really has emerged that you would say has it is Tekla. Like I can say certain things that she does well in the ring, but there's just something cool about her, right? That you're kind of captivated and really interested in watching her. Just the way she is, there's a presence, and I feel like, I like that you acknowledge like Matt Cross has gotten more successful creative runs, I think, in other places. But for some reason, ROH, I feel like it's that example of a wrestler where it's the opposite, where they have a lot of the basic checklist things down, but they're missing it. Like there's a big gap in them where it's just like, they have like negative it. There's something that makes the sum of their work less compelling than it should be on paper, where your eye's not drawn to them. It's like, I find a lot of matches, if they're tags or four ways in this year that we've watched Matt Cross in ROH, like if he's not in the ring for a few minutes, I kind of forget he's in the match and almost get surprised when I see him again, like in a weird way, which is weird. Again, it's like a negative presence.
Which, the strangest part is that it seems like it's only in ROH where he has that problem.
Yeah, and I don't know why that is. It's because again, I agree with you. Like I'm in the mindset of you, which is like, I can't tell you like a specific thing he does that makes me feel that way, but I feel that way.
Yeah, I would say his best performance, in my opinion, other than like just some moments in that big street fight at Death Before Dishonor, was actually the show before this, the tag match with him and Erick Stevens against Quackenbush and Jigsaw. That was my favorite, probably Matt Cross match since he came to ROH. And this match was a lot less good than that one, in my opinion. And you wouldn't think so, given everyone else in the match. And I'm not saying it's all Matt Cross's fault, but it did seem like the sequences he was in there were worse than the sequences when Aries was in there. And it's obviously just like Matt Cross is really talented. This, for whatever reason, just wasn't a great fit. And I know that he doesn't have many more ROH matches after this, right?
Yeah.
So this match just chalk it up to just something didn't click. I think that's really what I would say about it. It wasn't bad at all. It was kind of pretty good at points, but it just didn't totally click.
And the other notable thing about this match, I'll point out, is they do try and sell Project 161 in a very corny Gabe Sapolsky style way, where at one point during commentary, clearly prompted probably by like a note from Gabe, Dave Prazak just says to Lenny, randomly, like in the middle of a tag team title match, have you seen any of these internet messages, any of these messages on the internet directed towards the Briscoes? And Lenny immediately goes, we're not allowed to talk about that. Just stop talking about that. Like, it's such a corny, but yes, that is very classic Gabe Sapolsky kind of booking. And I just like the way Prazak did. It was like almost like he was bored of the match. Like, hey, have you been following the internet lately? And then we end this show with what you talked about earlier, how it felt like there was less interviews on the show than normal. Most ROH shows end with interviews. This show ends with 3 minutes of the Briscoes celebrating. Like, if you want to see the Briscoes slap fans' hands, this show is for you, because they show a lot of it. And you keep feeling like, is this building to something? Is there going to be an angle? Because you're really showing 3 solid minutes of this. It's like, just nope, this is all the footage we have left, and we don't have anything to cut to. So enjoy. And that's how the show ends. So, Matt, with that delicious cherry on this Sunday, who wins the Madoff Trophy for this episode?
There were at points where I was like, maybe it should be Marufuji. There were points where I was like, actually, the best performance was Morishima. But I think if I'm really being fair, this was probably the best night of Erick Stevens' ROH run so far. So I feel like it would be kind of shitty not to give it to him. Like, it was a big moment for him. I think he did as well as he could be asked to do on this night. He won over a hostile crowd, with Morishima's help, of course. But I think it was a really nice performance from him, and I think he deserves the Madoff Trophy.
Yeah, congrats to Erick Stevens. And so for the show as a whole, I'll always talk about how high a floor, I just talked about how high a floor the Briscoes have. ROH in this era, we've talked about a lot, how high a floor they have for shows. In a way, this is not a bad show, because I think there's 2 pretty darn good matches on it in the Marufuji Generico and the Stevens Morishima match, and some matches that are decent, probably some matches that you liked a little bit more than me. But I think this is, if I was telling, of all the matches shows we've watched in 2007 so far, this might be at the bottom or near the bottom of just very inessential. Really, I would say you can just skip this show. Maybe if you really are interested in the wrestlers involved, you could watch the two matches I just named, but this just felt like a super inessential B show, even by ROH B show standards.
Yeah, certainly it was the most on paper B show that I could think of. Like, at least outside of like some of the shows in like the Osaka show, right? Like on paper, this really was nothing major at all. Like I said, the biggest draw to me on this on paper was Generico against Marufuji because it was like the closest thing to like a really novel match. I do think that people worked hard. I do think there were some noteworthy moments and a couple of matches where if you watch them, you'd have a good time. But yeah, this is a pretty inessential show. I don't think it was the worst show that we've seen in 2007 or anything like that, but it was uh, it was nothing to go out of your way for, that's for sure.
Yeah, and so for plugs, through the years at gmail.com, THROH is the way it's spelled on your phone right now or your YouTube or whatever. Um, at Trevor Dame on Twitter, at Mayor MGF on Twitter. We're also on Blue Sky under very similar names. You'll find them if you want them. And next time on the show, we'll be covering one of the really big ones because the show we're covering next time is a show that some people consider one of the greatest ROH shows of all time. That, of course, would be Man Up, the third, I believe, ROH pay-per-view. And that's a show with Bryan Danielson, Morishima 2, the first ever official ladder match of Ring of Honor with the Briscoes ending their feud with Steen and Generico, the Resilience versus No Remorse Corps in a best of three singles match series that ends that feud. And because I know some of our listeners like watching the shows along with us and then listening to the show after they watched it, a reminder, we are going to cover the DVD version, which means we're going to cover the whole 2-hour pay-per-view, and then we're going to cover the extra hour of DVD bonus stuff, which includes Matt Seidel's farewell match to ROH against Delirious. So, if you want to do all the work, if you want extra credit, you find the DVD version, watch all 3 hours. I have no idea if that's on Honor Club or not, that version of it, who knows? But there are ways to find shows. I'll just tell you, there are ways to find shows. So until then, that'll be a big one. So until then, have a good time. Have a great time.